Welcome, and thank you for being with us today for the Palo Alto City Council Candidate Forum. I am Nancy Shepard, President of the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto. This year, we are proudly celebrating both our 100th anniversary and the passage of the 19th Amendment enabling women the right to vote. The League of Women Voters envisions a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. We are a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation of citizens in government through education. Our organization has two distinct roles. One is advocacy for public policy issues that we have studied. The other is voter services, bringing voters impartial information on ballot initiatives and candidates. Voter services is the hat we are wearing tonight in presenting this forum where you can learn about the candidates running to represent our Palo Alto City Council. I'd like to remind everyone that the candidates have all agreed to participate under guidelines set for this forum. Also, because this is a Zoom webinar, only the candidates and the moderator will have their mics activated. Due to the nature of webinar, we cannot provide technical assistance to viewers, and the chat function will be disabled. We are being supported by Mid-Peninsula Media, where this forum is being live streamed right now on one of their local channels and will be rebroadcast in the coming weeks. The League will also make this available on our YouTube channel. You can find this link at our website, lwvpaloalto.org. Note that whenever this recording is aired, it must be shown in its entirety to ensure that no statements are used out of context. All candidates have agreed to this requirement. Conducting a candidate forum as a Zoom webinar is a new experience for all of us, and we hope you will be patient as we learn together. Let me now turn the program over to our moderator this evening, Sigrid Pensky.
Thank you, Nancy. Good evening, everyone. This forum will provide you the opportunity to hear from the 10 candidates running for the 4 city council seats. Before we begin, I'd like to go over the format for the evening. We are scheduled to finish at 6, and to help us keep us on track, we're using a computerized stopwatch, which will also randomly shuffle the order in which the candidates speak throughout the forum. We will begin with opening statements. Each candidate will get up to 2 minutes. Then we'll have a question period. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer those questions. Again, they'll be randomly shuffled. Questions for this forum have been solicited in advance from all attendees. We've sorted them and screened them and combined some of them to avoid duplication and also to cover as many topics as we can. We will also be taking questions during the forum. If you would like to submit a question, please do so using the Q&A function on your screen. Please submit all questions anonymously to all candidates and try and be succinct so we can get through them. We will then have closing statements. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes for the closing statements. And with that, welcome everyone. We'll move to opening statements. Mr. Lee, you're first.
Good afternoon, Palo Alto. My name is Stephen Lee. I'm a progressive Democrat running for Palo Alto City Council. I'm one of just 3 candidates endorsed by the County Democratic Party. I've also been endorsed by 8 other Democratic groups and count endorsements from the League of Conservation Voters, Carbon Free Palo Alto, former Mayor Sid Espinoza, School Board Member Jennifer DiBrienza, among others. For the past 3 years, I've had the honor and privilege of serving you as a Palo Alto Human Relations Commissioner, working to make our community more welcoming, inclusive, and responsive to the needs of all members of our community. And I've worked on a range of issues ranging from gender equity to homelessness to LGBTQ issues, teen vaping, and mental health. I also serve on the VTA Citizens Advisory Committee and am a member of the Midtown Residents Association. All told, I have 17 years of local government experience working to serve my community. I'm running because I believe it's time for bold, progressive, and responsive leadership on our city council. I want us to be a city that is more just, more equitable, and a city that works for everyone. In order to get there, we need a council that is more responsive and is quicker to act and respond to all of the issues we care about. In particular, we need to get serious about housing, particularly many of the issues, whether it's addressing racial and economic inequality, reducing traffic, responding to climate change, enabling our public safety officers to actually live in the communities that they serve, ending homelessness, or reversing declining enrollment in our schools by enabling young families and teachers to live in and close to the communities they teach in. We need to get serious about housing because our inaction on it over the past many years is causing negative impacts to our community. I look forward to answering your questions, and I hope to earn your vote this coming November. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Koo?
I thank the League for their long history of helping voters learn about the issues so that they can make informed, meaningful votes. I am reminded of the importance of having good quality information as I work through the reports provided to council members in preparation for our meetings. City Hall can be a lot more transparent. It's not just the information that we don't get, it's also the information we don't know about. It's finding the information within the packet and within the report itself. City Hall has a problem with hearing from residents, hearing what residents are attempting to tell them. Before being elected, I experienced the frustrations and indignities that many other residents have suffered through for years. In endorsing me, the Palo Alto Weekly said more than others, Koo has been a council member for the majority of those residents who don't have connections at City Hall and who feel underrepresented. It is important for a council member to have strong network of people throughout the city, both to know what residents are thinking and to be able to utilize their knowledge and expertise in addressing the decisions before council. I am a 23-year resident with deep roots. I am a Democrat, registered Democrat. My volunteering includes school PTAs, coaching middle school athletics, helping seniors age at home, helping with senior lunch at La Comida, and leading the expansion of the emergency preparedness effort from auxiliaries to the fire department to a large network of neighbors helping neighbors. On policy, I'm distinguished from the other candidates in advocating for protecting and preserving our existing affordable housing. I fought against 75+ units of affordable housing being converted into a boutique hotel. 500 housing units would have to be built under current inclusionary zoning to replace those 75, or over 50 million in construction costs after purchasing the land. Recently, Governor Newsom said localism is determinative. It certainly is. We're faced. Thank you.
Ms. Eisenberg? You're next.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca Eisenberg. I'm a seasoned lawyer and negotiator with degrees from Stanford and Harvard and 3 decades of accomplishment in the private and public spheres. Working with a range of personalities, I took PayPal public in 2002. I brought housing to 500 of PayPal's service workers and helped pass the federal legislation, including the Violence Against Women Act and Access to Clinics Act. I have participated in activism for women's rights for 45 years, starting from rooting for the ERA in the 1970s, through listening to the Anita Hill hearings in law school, through mourning Justice Ginsburg's death on Rosh Hashanah last month. I seek to bring fairness, transparency, representation, justice, and sustainability to Palo Alto. Here in the capital of innovation, we need leadership with courage and integrity. Leadership that will stand up to moneyed interests on behalf of the community. Leadership that will bring housing to the people who need it most, the lowest income workers, while also protecting our tenants and preserving our existing housing. All 3 Ps are important for housing in Palo Alto. I'm endorsed by Planned Parenthood with a 100% rating and all the local labor unions, including SEIU and the 101 member groups of the South Bay AFL-CIO Labor Council due to my dedication to working families. I want to note that there are 4 seats and 4 women running. We have never had, at least that I can remember, a majority of women on the city council. And now would be a fantastic time. The 4 women running represent the diversity of women in the real world, different opinions, different voices, different backgrounds. I hope that you will vote for me as I hope to bring this to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Burt.
Thank you. And it's great to be before the league. So many of you are familiar that I spent 9 years on the city council and 2 terms as mayor in 2010 and 2016. But long preceding that, I grew up in the region. Both of my parents were teachers. I co-founded a company in high-tech manufacturing that received multiple environmental awards and was a model for sustainable manufacturing. And then in the mid-90s, I became head of the University South Neighborhoods Group and helped lead the South of Forest Coordinated Area Plan that developed a consensus process that had affordable housing, daycare, historic preservation, a new park, and was really an inclusive process that brought together all stakeholders of the community to come up with consensus solutions, including higher density housing in exchange for some of those other benefits. After that, I served 9 years on the Planning Commission and then on the City Council, including taking us through the Great Recession and the recovery from it, which was difficult like what we're facing today. So today we now have not only the health impacts of the pandemic, but the economic impacts and the need to preserve our city services and to place people first through this period and reallocate our resources on a strategic plan that defers some of the capital projects so that we can really support the needs of the community that are exceptional right now. I also have a great background in emergency preparedness and was one of the leaders on our environmental initiatives and particularly climate change, which has stalled out in our efforts since I left the council in 2016. I got the support of all 3 of the papers, strong support, and the League of Conservation Voters and the Sierra Club. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Varma.
Thank you, and thank you to the League for the opportunity to have a chance to talk to the people of Palo Alto. I moved to Palo Alto in 1999. I was 19 years old. It was my first job out of college. I didn't know a lot about Silicon Valley or Palo Alto, but there were great jobs here. And as soon as I came here, I just fell in love with the weather, the people, and all the resources that we had here. I was fortunate enough to work for companies like Google, where I led products like Google Search and Gmail, then worked for Square, where I built tools for small businesses. And most recently, I'm a director at WhatsApp, where I help build tools for businesses across the world. And I wouldn't have had these opportunities unless I was in Palo Alto. And I worry because I feel like that's not going to be true a decade from now and in decades to come. And this is a macro change that started, I would say, a few years ago, where we haven't kept up with the resources and the needs that people coming to Palo Alto need. So that's everything from like not having housing to discouraging job creation in Palo Alto. So this is what initially started worrying me and wanting to make sure that our children and other people who come here have these great opportunities that we're known for. So with COVID, this macro trend has really accelerated. Large employers are moving their employees to work remotely. Small businesses are closing. We have a lot of really difficult hurdles for businesses and individuals if they want to be in Palo Alto. For businesses, it's difficult zoning restrictions, difficult planning processes they have to go through. And for people who want to live here, it's a matter of housing, and it's just really difficult to have home ownership. And I'm very fortunate enough that I am able to own a house in Palo Alto, and I'm able to raise my kids here, and they love it. And I love all the resources like the Junior Museum and Zoo and the libraries and schools. So I want to ensure that our future generations have those opportunities as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stone.
Good afternoon. My name is Greer Stone. I was raised in Palo Alto as the son of an Ohlone teacher and law enforcement officer. I attended school at Duveneck, Green, and Pali. I'm both an attorney and teacher. I'm the student activities director at Pali, and I teach U.S. history at Gunn High School. I've been involved in making our community better for our residents and most vulnerable neighbors for the last decade. I was appointed to the Palo Alto Human Relations Commission at the age of 23 and served as the commission's chair and vice chair. I was appointed to the Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission by Supervisor Simidian in 2017. During my time on the commission, I have represented Palo Alto's interests at the county level. I currently serve as the Human Rights Commission Vice Chair, and I chair the Commission's Justice Review Committee. I'm a Democratic delegate representing our Assembly District. I'm also the chair of Palo Alto's largest residents association, the Midtown Residents Association. My wife and I are both teachers, and we rent an apartment here in Palo Alto. I'm running for city council because I believe I have the experience, temperament, and understanding of this community to help lead us through these difficult times. Palo Alto has reached an inflection point. Both the pandemic and the social unrest across the nation in furtherance of Black Lives Matter have shown a light on the injustices pervasive across our nation and here at home. This unprecedented crisis has provided us a unique opportunity to have what many commentators have labeled a great reset. It's a small window of time where we can forego the antiquated systems that cause so many of our persistent problems, like affordable housing, traffic, social injustice, and climate change, and instead forge ahead with a future that is diverse and equitable. My campaign will be focused on addressing these many challenges. I'm endorsed by the Palo Alto Weekly, the San Jose Mercury News, Sierra Club, Senator Jerry Hill, Vice Mayor Tom Du Bois, and many more elected leaders and community members. I'm looking forward to our discussion today and to have the opportunity to earn your vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Tanaka.
First, I'd like to thank Nancy Shepard for helping to make this happen, the League of Women Voters, and very important work that you guys do, and also Sigrid for your moderation of today. So I moved here in 2004. I started out as president of my neighborhood association here in College Terrace. Two important things that I did while president was first a traffic calming program in our neighborhood, and then also implementing the first residential permanent parking program. And this has since become the template throughout Palo Alto. We have probably about a dozen now. I then moved on to the Planning and Transportation Commission, where I was chair. The big project I worked on there was the Cal Ave Streetscape project. What this project did was really revitalize the street. It moved it from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, provide a little bit more parking as well as a better sense of place. Concurrently, I served on the Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Commission, where I helped to build a plan for funding our infrastructure, and also got our roads to be one of the best conditions in the county from being one of the worst. On City Council, I'm currently chair of the Finance Committee. The first couple of years I spent in terms of doing pension reform, where we were accounting for the unfunded pension liabilities, as well as got the council to start putting some money away for some of our unfunded pension liabilities. When COVID struck, I started working on trying to help the small local businesses. So I pushed for the street closures to handle outdoor dining, as well as got them small business grants. I'm probably most famous for having office hours every Sunday, where I talk to constituents. And the reason why I'm running is right now we're going through a very deep recession, probably the worst in our lifetime, maybe in the country's history. And so we need to have sensible spending during this recession. Many are hurting right now. And the other part is implementing a recovery plan. I have a very strong background in retail, which is the main business that's been hurt. And I want to use my experience in that area to help these small local businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Templeton.
Thank you. And thank you all for having us here tonight. Instead of sharing a detailed bio and my extensive list of endorsements, I'm going to take a risk and focus on the vision for the city during my opening statement. So my husband and I moved here in 2005 for the schools, the canopy, University Avenue, and the promise of living the Silicon Valley dream. And 15 years later, we have 2 kids in public schools. I have a 10-year career at Google behind me and a graduate degree from Stanford. We have been very lucky, but it hasn't been easy making it here in Palo Alto. And that golden dream isn't attainable by everyone who lives and works here. But why? So I've been thinking, isn't it possible to have the beauty and charm and the educational opportunities of Palo Alto alongside justice and dignity for all of our residents? We can have abundant single-family homes alongside the homes of young families, students, seniors, teachers, and tech workers. As leaders, we have a moral imperative to address the barriers to opportunity for all of our residents. We need to make the promise of Palo Alto available to everyone who lives here now and for the next generation. It's hard work to re-examine our systems and practices and redesign them to work better for everyone. But on City Council, that's our job. So where do we start? Land use policy will be important to Council's work ahead, and my time as chair of the Planning and Transportation Commission has prepared me for this discussion. We also need sustainable transportation to combat climate change and traffic at the same time, after the pandemic, of course. And we need to take concrete steps to achieve better representation for traditionally underrepresented groups, so our panels, boards, and commissions are diverse and representative of the community. I have the background and leadership to help our city move forward on these issues. Let's deliver the promise of Palo Alto together. Please vote for change and vote for Carrie Templeton for City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lowing.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I really like to thank the League and all your noble goals, and I would like to encourage all of my fellow candidates tonight to help you achieve your goal by really helping answer the questions very specifically so we can inform your voters. I've lived in Palo Alto for over 30 years. It's home. Home was originally Illinois, where I was had a very modest upbringing and was schooled in the Midwestern work ethic. Unlike my parents, however, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I went to college in Indiana at DePaul University, paying my own college expenses because that was the only option. I came to the Bay Area in my 30s, and I managed to get a starter house in town until we could move to Palo Alto when our first child was 2 years old. And I now have a nice home in Professorville, but because of my upbringing, I don't take this for granted. In contrast, I really want to give back. My number one goal is to build affordable housing for people at lower income levels. I think we have an obligation to help them get the first rung on the housing ladder. And economic and ethnic diversity in our town is my highest personal and council goal. I've always done community service in Palo Alto. First, I worked on private boards for homeless services. Then I spent many years in youth sports in Palo Alto, and finally moved to parks and planning commissions for the last 10 years. I've worked on perhaps hundreds of issues over this 10-year period. And I spent a couple of decades in retail. The combination of my business and private sector experience is, I believe, exactly what is needed in a city council member facing the issues that we have today. I'm prepared, battle tested, and motivated.
Thank you. Ms. Malone.
Thank you all so much for having me. My name is Raven Malone. I'm an electrical engineer, a dog lover, a self-proclaimed tea connoisseur, and an art enthusiast. My endorsements include 13 organizations, many well-respected city leaders, California congressmen, assembly members, a senator, the current mayor, the current school board members, as well as previous school board, city council members, and mayors of Palo Alto, as well as neighboring cities, because I believe in the importance of the Bay Area working together to conquer many of our big problems. I was born and raised in Mobile, Alabama. I have an undergrad and master's degree in electrical engineering, and I've been an engineer for the past 8 years. While a systems engineer, I have been the lead engineer for multi-billion-dollar programs, leading engineers with different opinions to get a project done by the deadline. I've done this many times in my job, and I believe that my ability to collaborate with a variety of people will serve me well on council. It's important to work with other council members, community members, as well as our boards and commissions in order to make good decisions while keeping in mind the people who will be affected by those decisions. Our jobs are to improve the lives and well-beings of our constituents. I want to create better infrastructure for our future, advocate for housing as a human right, and reimagine community safety. I hope that you'll all join me. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, welcome all candidates. Thank you very much for being here tonight. It's now time to move to the questions that we gathered from our attendees. The first question, and I'll remind you, you have 1 minute to answer each question. How would you rate the city's response to COVID-19? Are there any things you would like to see done differently going forward? Mr. Lowing, you're first.
Yes, I think that in the short term, we've done quite a number of things, obviously helping small businesses. I think that the possibility of doing a little bit more is still on the table. The most important thing we can do is help get rid of COVID so we can get back and get open. But beyond that, we have to take a longer term view now because it's going to be long-term and it'll take us a while. And addressing things in this longer-term view, I think needs some investment, and figuring out what is the best track for downtown retailers and retailers in general is a good place to start. Closing retail is not the place to start because then you are guaranteed not to have it. But doing some innovation in retail, as we did when we put that retail preservation ordinance in place and allow retail is an example of what we can do. So I think we have to invest in it now and probably get kind of a czar to drive that for us.
Thank you. Mr. Varma.
So this is obviously a major issue for our city and way of life, not just here, but across the world. So I think that there are some things that we did well. So when I walk around in Palo Alto, I think that people are wearing masks, people are doing social distancing, and those are sort of the key things to prevent the spread of it. I think we did a great job of Palo Alto of shutting things down as soon as things were aware that prevented this initial spread. And then as things were coming up, I think closing University Avenue, closing California Avenue were definitely the right decisions in order to help our businesses recover. Also helping them with things like parklets and helping them with resources and shining a spotlight on them, I think really helped as well. I think that there's also some things that we didn't do as well. So using sort of the COVID emergency order in order to institute things like curfews in the city that luckily didn't end up happening, but these were like sort of abuses of power. Going forward, I think one of the key things we need to do is making sure that there is accessible testing and accessibility to vaccinations as soon as they become available.
Thank you. Mr. Stone.
Yeah, I commend the city on its efforts, especially early on when this pandemic first hit. I was glad to see that we had some quick movement on it. And given the fact that we are in one of the most difficult years in really our city's history, given the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the greatest civil unrest since 1968, and the greatest health threat to our country since 1919. We've done a lot to be able to maintain the city's health and safety, but also to be able to preserve our businesses. However, there have been some issues that I've been very concerned about. Ajit mentioned the COVID emergency order for the curfew was a terrible idea. Early on, the early budget cuts to our community was also terribly misguided and focused on preserving infrastructure projects and capital projects over that of community serving and people services, which I always believe we need to make sure we have people first as our mantra going forward.
Thank you. Ms. Malone.
I think that the city acted really quickly, and especially the assistance that we have within the city as well. For instance, we have Palo Alto Unified, and they're supporting families in need during the distance learning. And there was the Palo Alto Small Business Recovery Grant, which in my opinion, I wish that we had done more for our small businesses than using that money as a lottery system and just use it, fundraise the rest of the money and then allow that to help more businesses instead of just the 49 that were helped out of more than 2,000. Unfortunately, we were very slow with the testing. I wish that we would have been a lot faster when it came to that. But all in all, post-COVID, I would like to see better financing, especially looking at where we can pull funding from in order to recover our residents as well as our businesses from the financial burdens. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tanaka.
Well, this has been a tremendous, with the pandemic and the resulting recession has been unprecedented, as many have mentioned. So I think what was good was that we got the mask ordinance fairly quickly, which is what I pushed for. We stopped the evictions. We did the street closures for the restaurants. The small business grants, we actually did have business that also matched, but there's actually a lot more that needs to be done. So probably one of the biggest ones, if you look at other areas that have opened successfully, they've done randomized testing. That's actually a really key part of reopening, quarantining, doing contact tracing, and more importantly, we're coming up on wintertime. And so while the street closures have helped a lot during the summer streets, during wintertime we need to have outdoor heating. We need to have a way where this can continue somehow. The other really big issue, which not a lot of other candidates haven't talked about, is unemployment. Unemployment is starting to become a big issue. People have lost their jobs or taken pay cuts. And we also need to prioritize our budget better because our revenue has dropped significantly.
Thank you. Ms. Templeton?
Thank you very much. I think we have done an okay job. And for me, okay is not good enough. We can do better in Palo Alto. The things I've liked are the innovative programs like the Shared Streets program to get people out of their house and not have to vie with cars and vehicles on the road. But we've only done that in a couple of places, and I would love to see that in a few more neighborhoods. We also have the Summer Streets program, which you heard other candidates talk about, so I won't go into more on that, but I do think it's nice to do programs like that, and that it does support some of the small businesses, but perhaps we can do things to promote and help other small businesses survive that aren't on those streets. And I'm happy about the mask ordinance. Things we should do different. We need to have better PPE for protective equipment for our senior centers. We're seeing rash of outbreak in places like the Channing House. That's totally unacceptable. That's something we could be helping with and making sure they have what they need, and caring for our mental health of those that are stuck at home. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Koo?
Yes, I have to be fair. The city has done a lot of work as fast as they could do with caution in terms of ensuring that as we open back for business, that there is health addressed and safety addressed. City of Palo Alto has a Palo Alto Stanford Citizen Core Council that meets with all the hospitals locally, as well as the shopping centers and businesses, to ensure that we're updated in terms of what their capacity is and how we're operating safely. I just want to make sure that also, as we're going through all of this, addressing the pandemic, that we're also taking the time to learn from this, so that as we're coming out of it, we have matters in place and plans in place in order to reopen. Again, I believe that the city could have done a lot more, but we did have a 40 million budget cut over the summer.
Thank you. Mr. Burke?
Yeah, so I think the city has done a good job on the communication. It's been for the city staff, a challenging and stressful time. But having led the emergency services efforts on the council previously, I was concerned that we were not acting proactively enough. In late February and early March, I co-authored a set of recommendations to the council with 5 different former mayors signing on. And a number of those areas are still waiting to be addressed, including informing the public of the full powers of the declaration of emergency services, which included the curfew, which was perhaps even illegally done. Going forward, we need to leverage our resources in the community more. The city can't provide everything, and anticipate. For instance, the playground reopening has been allowed for 2 weeks, and we're just now getting ready to proceed that. Finally, we need to proceed on how to help businesses reopen indoors safely with healthy air.
Thank you. Ms. Eisenberg?
Palo Alto, home to 2 of the world's top hospitals, as well as the world's very best research university in the world, in my opinion, Stanford University, has underachieved its potential. In the innovation capital of the world, we could have been first to roll out universal free testing, as worked so well in East Asia. We still have time to roll that out, as well as a robust, modern contact tracing system, which Palo Alto is perfectly situated to create. This is a great example of how we can involve our very educated community in solving this problem. Where we really hit it out of the park was where the community stepped up. In particular, it was amazing to see so many community members come together to provide PPE for essential workers. But the city needs to do that too, as well as for the community and other workers and seniors. One area that I plan to focus on, though, is childcare. We know we can't restart the economy and reopen our schools until childcare is in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lee?
While our city has done an okay job, our city could certainly do more to help educate and enforce the health orders, provide better testing that will enable us to reduce our numbers. Where our current city council really fell down was in this last budget cycle. cutting $40 million from vital community services and programs instead of delaying non-essential programs, non-essential capital projects. Where they additionally fell down was delaying a business tax. Earlier this year, I worked with others, including Pat Bort, to consider putting a business tax on our November ballot, but they unnecessarily delayed that initiative. While we are asking small businesses and families in our city to do more with less, why wouldn't we take this opportunity to ask our larger corporate citizens who are profiting quite well during this COVID-19 to finally step up and pay their fair share to help mitigate the impacts to our families and small businesses and to vulnerable communities? Now is the time to ask them to step up and do their fair share. We could generate between $10 and $50 million to preserve programs and to make valuable investments in housing and other infrastructure projects.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our second question. What are the top 3 actions Palo Alto should take to address climate change? Mr. Burt, you're first.
Thank you. So we adopted in 2014, we became one of the first cities globally to have 100% carbon neutral electricity. In 2016, I led the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, which set the aggressive goal of an 80% reduction in our greenhouse gases by 2030. When I left office then in 2016, we had achieved almost half of that, 36% reduction. Since then, we've obtained an additional 2%. We've lost our momentum. We need to pursue indoor building electrification with a focus on commercial buildings first and residential second. We can mandate that on the commercial buildings, and we need to drastically accelerate our adoption of electric vehicles and begin to focus on how we support lower income folks with vehicle buybacks and other efforts to help them convert to cost-effective electric vehicles in the next couple of years.
Thank you. Mr. Tanaka, I'll repeat the question once. It seems maybe a few of you want that. What are the top 3 actions Palo Alto should take to address climate change?
Well,
Mr. Tanaka.
Thank you for that question. Climate change is one of the biggest issues facing humanity. It's a probably the most important problem long term. And if you look at where most of the greenhouse gas comes from in our city, most of it comes from transportation, roughly about 65%. And the way to really achieve this is to do things like micromobility, for instance. So for instance, I'm a very avid biker, but we need to get the next tier of bikers, people who are more casual bikers. And to do that, we have to make them feel safe with protected bike lanes. We need to make sure that there's places to lock their bike, to charge their bikes. We should do scooter and bike shares. We should make sure that we have subsidies, not just for electric cars, but also for electric bikes. We should also promote like work from home. We have some of the bluest skies right now. On council, I'm the only council member that actually bikes to council meetings. We also need to get transit better. So VTA is really dominated by San Jose, so we need to do better than that. The other leg of it is natural gas. So I voted for the banning of natural gas in new homes, but we need to do that for existing homes as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
With climate change, we face an existential crisis. As a millennial, my generation and the next will be left with the consequences of our delayed action or our slow action. So we really need to get serious about climate change. First thing we need to do is address our housing crisis. We have a 3-to-1 jobs to housing imbalance, which generates unnecessary carbon emissions. We need to enable people to actually live near where they work and reduce their carbon emissions. We need to mandate full electrification of our buildings. We simply cannot afford to wait for new construction or renovated construction to mandate this conversion. We also need to look at how do we deprioritize vehicular traffic and enable and encourage people to use green transportation options. We also need to look at how do we tax the very behavior we need to discourage in order to fund the programs and changes we need to make. Now is the time for bold and progressive action. We cannot afford to wait any longer. We need strong leadership to address climate change.
Thank you. Mr. Stone.
I was raised with a deep love and sense of purpose when it comes to sustainability and protecting our environment. My father was a Yosemite Park ranger. These have been issues that have been so important to me. It's one of the reasons why I believe I'm endorsed by the Sierra Club. I think our 3 things, first needs to be providing less of a reliance on single occupancy vehicle in Palo Alto. Over 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions are caused by transportation. And so I would indefinitely extend telecommuting even when this pandemic ends. During a 7-week span at the height of shelter in place, greenhouse gas emissions in the Bay Area were reduced by 32%. So continuing telecommuting is going to help not only with traffic, but also air quality and greenhouse gas emissions, making sure we have a more bikeable city, more investing in our shuttle system instead of cutting it like council has done. We need to make sure we're protecting and expanding our tree canopy, especially the sequestration effect that trees have on greenhouse gas emissions. And then finally, electrification and what Pat Burt was talking about earlier as far as that is going to be also key to our strategy.
Thank you. Ms. Koo.
Thank you for repeating the question. I would have to agree with a lot of what Greer Stone had said. My hugest support is for the natural environment, especially with our tree canopy. The trees are one of the least expensive and ways of addressing clean air. And I think that, protecting it and preserving existing trees is very, very important, and also growing more. With each development that goes up, we tend to cut down the tree that is there that has already flourished. I also believe that we need to look at natural ways in curbing some of the pests in our environment. We are now using chemicals in order to kill mosquitoes versus having what we used to do with what was used to be natural. Lastly, I do completely agree with Greer Stone in terms of looking into regulations and legislation on telecommuting.
Thank you. Ms. Malone.
Thank you. We need to create better flood protection to combat sea level rise. We need to create better public transportation. This means many energy efficient shuttles with more stops, as well as better bicycle friendly infrastructure so that we're protecting our bicyclists. We also need more affordable and market rate housing, more density near transit. Most of our essential workers actually don't live here. That includes our teachers and our first responders. And out of our police force and our firefighters, only our police chief is able to afford to live here. So we need to do something in order to make it easier, not only for people to get around while in Palo Alto in a more energy efficient, environmentally friendly way, but we also need to allow for people to live closer to work so that those emissions aren't going into the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Eisenberg.
We know that a lot of climate change is caused by single occupancy vehicles, but right now our workers have little choice but to drive. For that reason, we absolutely need to invest in housing near jobs. For our lowest income workers, the jobs to housing ratio is actually much, much larger than it is generally. That for the people, the service people who help us in medical, medical health centers and other essential workers, the lowest paid of them, the ratio between jobs and affordable homes is actually 7-to-1. We count on these people to save our lives. We need to house them so they don't have to commute for hours every day. Same with teachers too. Second, we need to invest in transit. Locally, we must roll out a local system of free or affordable electric shuttles. And regionally, those shuttles need to coordinate with our many regional transportation units. That might be hard, but hard work is a part of my blood. Third, we have to invest in infrastructure to make biking and walking safe. Bike bridges and lanes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Varma.
Thank you. So the first aspect of climate change is that we are producing a lot of greenhouse gases. That's through two primary reasons. One is transportation, and the second is natural gas. So for transportation, I think a lot of people talk about the jobs imbalance, but I think people will be surprised to know, or maybe not, that 75% of people who live in Palo Alto leave Palo Alto for their job as well. And so I think it's critical that you have mixed use development where people live close to where they work. And so this is an opportunity for a lot of density in the right areas. So on El Camino, on Page Mill Road, there's areas where we can have a lot of mixed use and density where people live close to where they work. The second thing is public transportation. So we have Caltrain here, but I think that there's things that we can do to support things like the Dumbarton Rail so that we can make it easier to commute from the East Bay to Palo Alto. And then in addition to that, natural gas, I think, is also an area where we can encourage people to replace gas water heaters to electric and gas grills to electric grills. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lowing.
Yes, transportation and particularly public transit and housing are really long-term projects. So I just want to make a couple comments on some things that are shorter. Natural gas and single occupancy vehicle internal combustion engine are the two big villains right now. So I think we should do more in existing homes to incent putting in new appliances that are electric and require it on sale of those. The most important thing I think we can do now, though, however, is do whatever we can to radically improve the infrastructure for electric vehicles in town. Palo Alto always has a tendency to want to do that anyway, so let's incent it, maybe even incent it with a few bucks as well. And then lastly, as we talked about in terms of bikes, it's all about safety, but it's not all about bikes. There are a lot of more new technologies coming on for 2- and 3-wheel vehicles that would be very energy efficient, but they have to get where they're going safely.
Thank you. Ms. Templeton.
Thank you so much. I have a climate action plank on my website that you can take a look at more details. I'm going to share the highlights with you here. I think that we have to improve our green transportation system, and that means encouraging more active modes of transportation, biking, walking, things like that. So you've heard about that from some of the other candidates as well. It's good that we have consensus on this. I also want to see us offer more free, fare-free public transit to students and seniors. We do have some accommodations for lower income folks already. I think this would help expand usage of our public transit and make that a bigger deal, especially if we're talking about getting BTA to provide more service up here. That'll be important. I also want to incentivize homeowners to make green upgrades. I think Ed Lowing for mentioning that. And that we can also do things like encouraging more EVs by making it cheaper to install EV chargers at homes and businesses. And then we need to end sprawl by targeted growth near transit. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're already to question 3. State law will require Palo Alto to plan for at least twice as many new housing units by 2030 compared to our current housing requirement. How will that be funded? Existing incentives to private developers don't seem to be enough. What other creative solutions would you support? And Ms. Templeton, you are first.
Oh boy. Yes, I think this is an important question. How will it be funded and existing incentives aren't working? I think there's a whole complex backstory to why developers don't want to build in Palo Alto. And I think part of that is that we have made it extremely costly to propose a project here. There are numerous iterations, and then multiply that times the number of boards that they need to go through before even making it to council. And then occasionally they will have multiple approaches to council as well. And so when they bring their whole team, it's extremely costly. So even our affordable developers are experiencing the same kind of pushback. And I think if we as a community can come to terms with what is it that would be the minimum bar if they met this bar, that we would be more welcoming and accepting of proposals for affordable housing or a mix of market rate and affordable housing when it comes to council. So I think really we need to focus on removing obstruction from city council.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
So I think instead of using office development to fund housing, we need to look at alternative ways. And this is why I keep going back to the idea of a business tax. Depending on how we structure it, we could generate between $10 and $50 million a year, asking our large corporate citizens to step up and pay their fair share for the infrastructure and housing that we desperately need. So we need to look at a business tax. We also need to look at how do we reduce the costs to building dense housing along transit corridors. So we need to look at how do we lower our parking requirements. We need to reevaluate our height limits. And we need to enable build market rate housing, not only for its own sake. You know, we have a lot of people who work here, but don't live it here, but would benefit tremendously. But that market would actually enable us to build affordable housing as well. So we need a combination of business tax, reducing costs to dense housing, and market rate housing, both for its own sake, but also to get us affordable housing.
Thank you. Ms. Koo, you're next.
Thank you.
So the numbers that has been allocated are actually false numbers. They're double dipping right now. And there is a study by Embarcadero Institute that shows how the methodology came up. And yes, Carrie, you can laugh, but it is promoted by an unelected regional organization and promoted by Sacramento in an effort to densify at any cost and to take away our right for local control. I don't think the public should accept that because I don't, and I will continue to question that. As a longtime Democrat, I am dismayed by this effort to remove basic liberties from individuals. Furthermore, COVID is changing housing needs since employees are working from home and offering opportunities for converting unused office space to high density housing. This could be a start, but each must be full, but the developments needs to be also fully parked because there's no indications that people are changing their habits. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Varma.
So to me, this all comes down to how do you make the economics work for density? A lot of the conversations that we have are things like ADUs, but the reality is in Palo Alto, a lot of the properties are owned by wealthy individuals who aren't incentivized to create ADUs. Sure, there'll be a handful, which is great, but we really need to see much denser buildings. And so there's things like height limits, parking ratio restrictions, difficult zoning laws that we need to improve upon. And just going back to, it is a very difficult process to get something approved through the process in Palo Alto. And I've talked to many people who, even if they want to build like a live workspace, basically say that their project has been put on hold for many, many years, and it's unclear if they'll get approved. So they move to adjacent cities. And I think that we can work with businesses. A lot of times we talk about these companies like Facebook and Google that are going to put a business tax, but these companies aren't in Palo Alto anymore. They were once, and it's great that they started here, but then they left. And they've committed to funding housing, and we can work with them. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Lowing.
Extraordinarily hard question to talk about for only 60 seconds. All the candidates would agree with that. Look, there have been some progress. We worked on the housing improvement program that was then passed by council. That's getting some bites now. There are ADUs out there. Other folks have mentioned viable means of addressing this, which is a business tax. There's a development tax. There's actually zoning laws themselves, which we can just say, you got to build housing here or nothing. And the other thing is that all these numbers that came out from ABAG RENA are appropriately weighting affordable housing, but there's no financing. I talked to Mark Berman, and he said, don't look to the state for any help on this thing. We're just, we got problems too. So we got to figure this out on our own. And I strongly favor looking at corporate partnerships. Some of these folks are going to have a social conscience as well as a business need to house their folks. And I think there's some room for real progress on that.
Thank you. Mr. Burt.
Yes. So we need to provide housing at all three income levels: low income, moderate or workforce income, and upper income or luxury housing. But the state housing mandates are really extremely severe. We're talking about up to 10,000 units, or 5 times the allocation that we had previously had, a 40% increase in Palo Alto population in the next 8 years. Nevertheless, we have some opportunities to significantly increase our housing in all those areas. The ADUs are actually, we've had an 8-fold increase in ADU production as a result of our changes. We have more on the horizon. The housing incentive program was the biggest increase in density in zoning that we've had in decades, and it's having right this year multiple proposals coming forward. And we need to rezone commercial lands so that housing doesn't have to compete with much higher rate of returns for office, including in the Stanford Research Park, where we should really plan for new communities.
Thank you. Mr. Stone.
Yeah, I mean, housing is my number one issue. It's the issue that my wife and I understand so well, along with so many of my colleagues in the Palo Alto School District. And it is this reason why we are losing so many incredible and talented employees who give so much to our community. But the big problem has been that we have, for decades now, we have promoted job growth over housing growth. And so we really need to change the market, how the market works, to make sure that we're making it more lucrative for developers to build housing rather than office space. Some of the ways that we can do that is by really having a much stronger office cap, by increasing impact fees that commercial developers have to pay, and really developing our own source of income to be able to actually build that affordable housing. The business tax, a vacancy tax, those impact fees, increasing our inclusionary zoning. Market rate housing is not going to create the type of housing that we need for our lower segment of the market, as well as people like my wife and I who are trying to live here. So we do need a true investment in that affordable housing.
Thank you. Mr. Tanaka.
Thanks, Ingrid. So socioeconomic diversity in our city is definitely disappearing. Housing is a problem. ADUs are helping, but really the one real way to solve it is actually smaller units. Smaller units near transit are naturally more affordable. You know, the construction cost is a lot per square feet, but there's less square footage in a smaller unit. You don't need government subsidies. In fact, smaller units are actually more profitable per square foot for a developer to make than a larger unit. But there's a lot of issues. Streamlining the process. We have a very uncertain entitlement process. It could take years to go through. It's very, very hard for someone who wants to build housing to actually do it. We have the Mike's Bike project that's been approved for 2 years now and still hasn't broken ground. The impact fees really make these projects unprofitable. The other factor in terms of really enabling smaller units is to push more mechanized parking structures. Those are about 2 to 4 times more efficient. If you look at the average parking structure, only 10% is actually cars. The other thing to think about is we're going to a big economic slowdown, so prices are already starting to drop.
Thank you. Ms. Malone.
Thank you. So the problem with having housing in Palo Alto is how hard it is to build here. And that's what Carrie touched on. If we make it easier to build housing and streamline the process, there will be developers who will want to build housing here. This means allowing flexibility in zoning laws, density incentives, as well as lowering the parking minimum. As far as how to pay for it, I support taxing our large businesses that have more than 50 employees and then fluctuating that tax based on how many employees that business has, so that a business with 50 or 60 employees isn't paying the same amount as a business with hundreds of employees. And I understand that a lot of businesses are leaving. So I would also like to look into working with corporations so that they can pay housing to help with the job to housing imbalance in the Bay Area. It's really important that we're hurting our whole city by not building housing. So it's important that we come up with a solution to build housing as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Eisenberg.
First, I want to say, as an attorney who spent a large part of my 30 years in my career in working in the lending business, I can assure you that it's actually not that hard to get resources and funding for these types of developments. Also, to correct some earlier statements, state sources of funding have been highly available via the CARES program to the state. The Home Key program last month gave out $600 million to other cities for affordable housing projects. Those cities that received tens of millions of dollars in Home Key grants included Mountain View, Santa Clara, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Fresno, because they applied for this money, but we did not. When I met with Ed Shikata, I encouraged him to sign up for the DHCD mailing list, which is where these availabilities become known. Also, as you all know, I've been advocating for a large business tax for 5 years. Of course, we should do that. Public land trusts, funding from commercial bonds, not residential ones, and taking advantage of mortgage lines are all other ways we can afford to build housing. If we have the will, let's have the will.
Thank you. All right, we're moving on to our fourth question. We're going to stick with housing with a little different lens. Where do you stand on allowing modest density housing such as duplexes, triplexes, or small 2-story apartments in our single-family neighborhoods? And what is your view of building large residential buildings along major roads like San Antonio and El Camino? Ms. Malone, you're first.
Thank you. Well, you basically just answered the question for me. I support all of that exactly. So I support medium density as well as high density, especially in transit and in transit areas. I mean, we're in the middle of a housing crisis, and it's important that we do what we can. I know that a lot of neighborhoods don't want multifamily units, but we currently have neighborhoods with multifamily units in them. So I think that it's important that we respect the neighborhoods that don't want them, but if there are neighborhoods that currently have multifamily units, we should build some multifamily units there, as well as building multifamily units near transit, also building up, so more density, so allowing for more flexibility with our height minimum so that we can squeeze it in more units. And if we squeeze in more units, we can get more affordable units within that housing structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Burt.
So I strongly support first what we've already done of designating our downtown areas along El Camino and now in the San Antonio area for higher density housing. With the housing incentive program that was adopted in 2018, we significantly upped the housing density highest and most streamlined for affordable housing. That's actually already been accomplished, and that was a big part of the Wilton Court process being able to go through as it did. Then workforce and higher income housing. The biggest opportunity we have for that higher density housing, as I mentioned, in the Stanford Research Park. It's a low density development. They have limitations on what they can do in the how much office they can add. As far as in the single family neighborhoods, we've already converted them to actually 2 accessory dwelling units to every site. I don't think we need to go further than that. And a number of these candidates tonight have proposed eliminating single family zoning throughout Palo Alto in the neighborhoods.
Thank you. Ms. Eisenberg.
Yes, I absolutely support reasonable measures to increase our density. Of course, Palo Alto has used your taxpayer funds to hire several expensive consultants to ask, what can we do to get these developers to build housing? And the developers have overwhelmingly given 2 answers. One, they need higher heights. They need the lifting of these incredibly outdated height limitations. And B, they need flexibility with cars, with parking. Now, A is easy for us to do. Let's let these housing buildings go higher. It's not a big deal. It won't hurt you. Having more people in our community is a good thing. It will increase and improve the character of our neighborhood to have more children there. You know, grandparents being with their grandchildren. I want that for my kids. I believe most residents want that too. As to reducing the parking, we really need to put in place our systems of transit first before we can let that go. But let's put in place the transit. There's so many things we can do here in Palo Alto to make affordable housing happen. Let's do them. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Lowing.
Yes, thanks. So take your second part first. Yes, we should have high density, tall buildings for housing on key corridors. PTC just worked on opening up the CS zoning so that we've, as I like to say, created new land where even more housing can go. I agree with Pat Burt that the research park is just sitting there waiting to be cultivated. With respect to R1, folks, the math just doesn't work. The other day, maybe it was even yesterday, Stephen, I think you said, don't worry, if we eliminate R1 and put up duplexes and quads, don't worry, your land prices will go down. That's correct. You said they were going to go up. They are. That's a problem, because then you knock down a house and you build 4 multi-million-dollar houses. That's not good. We should focus on our most important thing, which is affordable housing, and that's not where that's going to happen. It's going to happen in the research park and in your second part of your question, in higher density units on corridors.
Thank you. Ms. Templeton.
Thank you so much. I think that R1 zoning already allows throughout the city the ability to build 2 additional units of housing on those lots already. And that's through ADUs and JADUs, as someone previously mentioned. So R1 zoning and the threat of eliminating R1 zoning has already been done de facto. That's interesting because there's a lot of fear mongering around it. you know, oh gosh, they're coming for your R1 zoning. Nobody's planning to take existing single family homes and tear them down on your behalf. That's not happening. But if you did want to turn your home where you raised your kids and now you're an empty nester, but you don't want to leave it, if you want to turn that into an income source, currently you have two options. You can do the ADU or the JADU, both of which are very expensive. We'd like to be able to be a little bit more flexible about how you do that. And if you want to create a larger unit through a duplex instead, maybe you should have the option to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Stone.
I'm highly supportive of increased density and housing, in our commercial cores, as Pat Bird and Ed Lowing already said, in the Stanford Research Park, along El Camino. There are a lot of places in Palo Alto where we can create that increased density to be able to provide for more housing, to be able to, that will be targeted for affordable housing, to make sure that we can create better inclusion and diversity and equity in our town. What's not going to do that, and what all the research I have seen, I mean, several different books that I've all read and studied on this issue of upzoning and creating more small units, like Ed just pointed out. When you say to somebody, all of a sudden now on an acre of land, you can, when you used to have 10 units of housing, now you can have 100 units of housing. Exactly. It doesn't hurt the housing prices. It makes them skyrocket. And we have seen that in Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, cities across the country and world. We need to actually be investing in affordable housing and not believing that the market is going to be able to control that.
Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. Ms. Koo?
Yes, you know, Greer and Pat has said it all, including Ed. We, at this point, at this time, in the R1 neighborhoods, which are mostly the single family neighborhoods, ADUs and JADUs are allowed. So potentially what you can have next door to you is 3 units and without regulations. So there is no regulation in making sure that it is affordable, it is low income, that you don't know if it's going to be an office. Potentially, many of them are also rented out as Airbnbs. So the city has no tracking of what these are. And so if we are going to be moving into allowing duplexes and triplexes, they could all be at 1,250 square feet or whatever square feet it is, which maximizes the entire lot with no open space, and there's no parking regulations. So there does require a need for a lot of caution, what is going to happen next door to you.
Thank you. Mr. Tanaka.
Thank you. So ADUs in single family areas, as other candidates have mentioned, it's already starting to happen. It's actually state mandated, so it's not, the city actually doesn't have much of a choice in that. At the last council meeting, we expanded rules for ADUs. You know, I've been pushing for more underground building for ADUs. That way you can actually have more housing without having a visual impact, as well as underground parking, which also doesn't have an impact on the streets if you could park your car on the lot. I think ADUs are actually a really nice solution because that allows multi-generational living. It allows grandparents to help take care of the kids. It allows maybe someone that's retired to live there and rent out the main house. So it gives a lot of flexibility. Really, the best solution is small units near transit, as I said before. And housing really needs to be near amenities and schools and the different services. I think the other part that's really important to think about is what is the economics? What's going to create the incentive for people to actually build? And one of the things that I have is I have a lot of backing from people. Okay,
thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I absolutely support building dense housing along transit corridors and in the research park. But unless we're willing as a community to build all of our housing in these areas and building higher and more and even denser housing of units, we need to get serious about addressing exclusionary zoning. If we get rid of exclusionary zoning, enable duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes in traditionally single family neighborhoods, it reduces the pressure a little bit on building all of that housing unit along dense corridors. We also need council members who are honest and confront the actual social historical motivations behind exclusionary zoning, which are successors to redlining and other overt forms of discrimination. Study after study has shown that exclusionary zoning has only continued to amplify the racial and economic inequalities in our community. And I want to set the record straight. I said that there have been studies that suggest that building duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes does not reduce the value of your single family homes. So by building duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, those units are obviously more affordable, but it won't impact the value of your family home next door.
Thank you. Mr. Varma?
So I am a huge proponent of significant density increases in the right area. Like, as you mentioned, San Antonio and El Camino. I think there are a lot of other areas like Page Mill where this makes a lot of sense. But I do not believe in creating blanket laws across the city. And I'll just give you an example of the densest or the most populous city in the Western Hemisphere is Sao Paulo, Brazil. Sao Paulo, Brazil has a district in the center that is Jardins, which is basically a residential neighborhood, single family housing, and it's also a very diverse city. So I think that they have to have significant density, but also, again, we have a lot of places in Palo Alto where we can create that density. And I think you just go back to when you look at projects that have been attempted in these areas, like there's a project right now that's being attempted on El Camino near Page Mill. There's a lot of opposition because of minimum affordable housing requirements, which effectively means nothing is getting built. So for me, is I care about the outcome. And to me, that outcome is we need dense housing in the right areas.
Thank you very much. Our next question, number 5, changes gears a little bit. What efforts, if any, should the City Council take to address systemic racism in our community? Ms. Eisenberg, you're first. Oh, yes, Ms. Eisenberg. Right?
Right, I'm ready. So there are
I'm sorry, you know what? I apologize, Ms. Eisenberg. It's
Okay.
Mr. Varma. I apologize.
No worries.
Take my apologies. Mr. Varma.
So I think that it's pretty clear that there are demographics and groups in Palo Alto that are not proportional to the population of the world or the America or California. And so when you look at this, it's like, well, are we not a welcoming city? And so I think that a lot of this comes down to we have to create more housing. And I think that there are like questions around like systemic racism. There are events in Palo Alto's history that have been really bad events, whether it's like police like accosting people who are like sitting in their car eating ice cream. Like that was an event that happened in the last 20 years. And there's a lot of these events that I think that we can address and make sure that people are welcome here, and that we fix these issues that have been lingering for a long time towards creating more inclusive opportunities. I think the timer resets, so I'll just stop there.
Thank you. Sorry for the confusion. Ms. Koo.
Yes. So I, as an immigrant Asian American person married to an African American man, I have personal experience with many forms of racism. It has presented as a mother pulling her child away from mine in a Gymboree class, to neighbors calling the police on my husband while he, as a realtor, was looking for the lockbox at a property that he was going to show. It hurts, and it does exist here in Palo Alto, subtly, not as where my husband grew up, pretty much in his face. It also exists in our neighboring communities. For us, I believe our education is key in getting ahead and having opportunities. I also grew up in 3 different countries and had the opportunity to go to school and to meet with other friends who are from all over the world. I think that's another part that could benefit with addressing that. You know, our police do have reform that we have to act on, but I also...
Thank you very much. Mr. Burt?
Sorry. So yes, we have to address this on multiple ways. First, we need to continue and make significant progress in our justice system through police reforms, adopting the Can't Wait, to have greater diversity in hiring and training, to renegotiate our police contracts so that they don't have essentially veto over some of the necessary reforms there. But then we have to actually fund affordable and workforce housing. The market rate housing is not going to increase our diversity, no matter what the historic zoning might have created 60 years ago. We have to work and actually fund affordable and workforce housing that provides that through a business tax and impact fees that the current council majority had opposed. So those are the things.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Yeah, as another person of color, I've certainly had my fair share of experiences with racism, but experience with racism is not enough. We need bold and progressive leaders who will actually advance policies to address systemic racism. We need leaders who acknowledge the exclusionary historical policies around our housing, including exclusionary zoning. We need folks who acknowledge that Wuhan virus is itself a racist statement. And there are people on this call who don't necessarily believe that, but it is. If we can't even get on board with that fact, then it's really difficult to create systemic change. We also need folks who realize that we need systemic change in our police department. Again, we have council members who think that it's just a matter of a few bad apples, but we know that this is a systemic, cultural, and institutional issue. And we need leaders who are going to be bold enough, who are going to stand up to our police department and force the change we need, as opposed to deferring to staff or believing that it's just an issue around the edges. So we need leaders who acknowledge racism in all its forms and who are going to actually advance policies to address it.
Thank you. Mr. Tanaka.
Thanks for the question. Overall, I do believe we have good officers and I appreciate their work, but there are issues. I think one way that we could actually solve some of these issues is better transparency. So there's definitely reluctance among the police corps to report when they see the incident. There's a kind of like, you want to have a esprit de corps and you want to like, everyone wants to kind of, but I think that the transparency is really important to really have the right kind of culture we want. We need to release information better, like body cam or call data, so we know what's happening. And so I've on the council, I'm on the ad hoc committee. We've been looking at different public safety delivery models with Councilmember Niss. So we looked at Sunnyvale, we looked at like Eugene, Oregon, Cahoots, and a bunch of others. And there's a plethora now of different type of public safety models. But one big issue is trying to figure out which model is actually better. And it's hard to compare which model is better because of the lack of standardized data. So I've successfully pushed for the city to be part of the Stanford Open Data Project, which will allow us to figure out what is a better model from what we have today.
Thank you. Ms. Eisenberg.
On Kol Nidre this year, the new rabbi at my beloved synagogue, Beth Am, gave an exceptionally engaging sermon that addressed this issue. What the rabbi said was that we in the United States have a legacy of racism that we did not create and that we are not to blame for. But we, and speaking to white Jewish people, he said, we white Jewish people have the moral obligation to fix this broken system that is completely unfair and unjust and causes so much harm and death and poverty in people of color, especially African Americans who have descended from enslaved people brought over from Africa. It is our moral obligation, and it is in the community's best interest for us to recognize this disparity and do everything we can to fix it, because we can't take one more life lost. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Malone.
Thank you. So it's important that we first acknowledge that there is a systematic problem and it's still existing within our city. For instance, the zoning that we have. ADUs are great, yes. I live on a lot with an ADU, but that still doesn't solve the problem. Primarily, R1 zoning has been proven to push out marginalized communities, which are mostly made up of Black and Brown people. Not to mention, in Palo Alto, there are so few Black and Brown people here. So even when I moved here, people automatically assumed that when I said Palo Alto, I meant East Palo Alto and not Palo Alto. We have to make Palo Alto more welcoming to people of all walks of life, because currently Black and Brown people are afraid of our police. They don't feel welcome in Palo Alto at all. And we need repercussions for not only racial profiling within our police, but for our citizens. Like what Lydia Koo said, that should have never happened, as well as accountability and transparency within our police department. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Templeton.
Thank you so much. I definitely think we need to make changes, and we should as a city address systemic racism. And so here are a few ways we can do it. We've already heard a bit about reimagining public safety and making sure that we understand where armed officers are helpful and where people with other skills like social service skills and mental health skills might be the better first responder. But we can also do things on the city governance level that really commit to kindness and value the dignity of our diverse city. So we can ensure that our city boards, commissions, and panels are diverse and representative of the communities affected by their decisions and recommendations. And we can do that at the time of appointment. We can also work on ways to get more diversity, including economic diversity, in our candidate pool for city council by enacting campaign finance reform and having set limits like neighboring cities do. These things will be a step in the right direction. I think we should start there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lowing.
Yes, on racism, I think it's perfectly objective that there is systemic racism in our city. The problem, first of all, is that we don't always see it until something happens. So we can't react, and then we're reacting after the fact. So we do need some preventative measures. I mean, one preventative measure on the legal front was that they took out all of that stuff from the 50s on leases and homes. That doesn't mean that leases or ownership of homes. That doesn't mean that in renting there's still some racism. I'm sure that there is. The issues with respect to looking at the police department are completely valid, but it's not as easy as saying we're going to pass legislation about it, because you got to dig it out, and there's some practicalities there, like the unions have got to cooperate, or we need another approach. And hopefully next time around, they're going to come to the table as partners. And the most important thing that we can do, I think Pat Bird said this, is have more Black and brown neighbors and have interesting lives with them. So letting people into this town is most important.
Thank you. Mr. Stone.
Yeah, systemic racism exists, absolutely. But I do also want to, I think a defense of Palo Alto to say, I do not believe Palo Alto is a racist community. In fact, I think it is a very inclusive and welcoming community. My wife is a Mexican immigrant, and she has always appreciated that she has felt included and welcomed into this community, and it feels like home to her. I've been working on these issues for the past 8 years as a former chair of the Palo Alto Human Relations Commission, current vice chair of the Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission. We need to do more to make our community more open to communities of color and low-income people. That's going to start by making sure we're focusing our housing policies to create that type of housing, workforce housing. I would love to see a displacement impact study to make sure that developers can show that their new large commercial developments are not going to disproportionately displace communities of color. We need to also make sure we have meaningful police reform. I kind of take offense to what was said earlier about our police officers oftentimes being racist or bad apples. For the majority of our police department are great people. Yes, there are always some bad apples in any department.
Thank you very much. All right, our next question is going to be back to a different topic. Housing and transportation are inextricably linked from an economic, environmental, and public health standpoint. Would you support bus rapid transit service on El Camino? What other transportation solutions would you prioritize? And Ms. Eisenberg, now you're first.
Thank you. So first, I want to be very clear that transit itself is not just an environmental issue about saving the earth, which is so important in itself. It's also an issue of racial and social justice, because the most of people who use public transit are actually people in communities of color, and they're not really using it, studies show, just for getting to their jobs. They're using it for doing their day-to-day lives, like going to the doctor, getting groceries, and maybe for once getting a chance to go to a park, like Palo Alto needs to make possible. So transit is a huge priority, and I believe it to be part of the social safety net. What solutions? We need to have locally electric shuttles. If our city council refuses to pay for them, let's ask Tesla. I think they have electric vehicles in their inventory. Additionally, we need to coordinate with our regional authorities. I'm a big fan also of moving the train up or down to clear that land for affordable housing. Let's get to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowing.
Yeah, the first part of your question was, you stated that housing was linked to transportation, but what was the second part?
Linked from an economic, environmental, and public health standpoint, would you support bus rapid transit service on El Camino? What other solutions would you suggest?
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, we've been talking on PTC for a couple of years now that it's getting worse. The VTA is getting worse. They're starting to reduce routes. And the feedback that we've gotten is that, well, get more housing and then we'll get more transit. And so in this case, it doesn't necessarily tie with more housing, it ties with the existing housing. So I would be highly supportive of that. I think that is one of the most crucial things that we could possibly do to address that socioeconomic class that Rebecca just brought up. There is always a link to housing and transit, but there's not necessarily a link from transit to housing, meaning we need the transit. And there are certain areas of, like when we looked at San Antonio, I wanted to make sure that we did a transportation study so that people could, in bikes and on foot, be safe walking from their homes if we put homes up there. So I'm totally supportive of the way you put the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Koo.
I would support the rapid transit. However, I would like to see that it is a robust system that is going to have the last mile, first mile connections. At this time, all we ever see from VTA, we're kind of like the forgotten city, even though we pay the same amount of sales taxes to VTA. So if they're not going to provide the robust system that we need, especially for our seniors as well as for the students, then we should be asking for that money back in order to supply our own shuttles here in town. More so, I think that, you know, with our different residential areas, we need to make sure that we have the ability for these shuttles to go into neighborhoods so people are not walking long distances to the main streets or the arterials in order to catch the buses. But most importantly, they need to be connected and has to be frequent, has to be reliable, sustainable, and clean. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Templeton.
Yes, thank you for this question. I'm really hopeful that we can work with our regional neighbors on improving the bus system. And I think that El Camino Real is a very long road. So it does make sense to have different levels of service. We already have the 22, which stops every stop, and then we have the 522, which doesn't necessarily stop at every stop. But if you're suggesting, could we have one that went just from city to city, you know, that would make sense too. I think really the issue is, and some others have mentioned this before, is making it work for Palo Alto too, right? We're at the very top north end of the county, and a lot of the we're kind of on the outside of the current VTA maps. So we want to work on routes. We want to work on making sure that the service in Palo Alto is really interconnected and robust and serves our city. So I think that's really the focus we should start at this point, but we should be good neighbors and partner with VTA on a regional system too.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stone.
Yeah, I'd like to really see us be able to work with our neighboring communities to see what can we do, what type of partnership can we make to make things like a shuttle service or make things like rapid transit along El Camino viable and a reality that's going to work for all of us, in addition to making sure that Palo Alto is not carrying the load on something that would be quite expensive to be able to do. One of the problems is we've seen that actually the car ownership is not on a downward trend, it's actually on an upward trend. And in the last 5 years, car registration per capita in Palo Alto has actually risen 14%. And that's a common trend that we're seeing around the country, while public ridership is actually going down. So these are serious issues. We really need to make sure that we're making it as easy as possible for people to be able to take public transportation. What Lydia Koo mentioned as far as that first mile, last mile dilemma is going to be really key. How do we get somebody from their front door to a shuttle route that might be a mile away from them, especially if they're a senior citizen?
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Mr. Varma.
I really like making sure that we have all sorts of transportation options so that every need is satisfied. I think the rapid bus line, I think is a great idea. Other ideas that I think make a lot of sense are making sure we satisfy the last mile. So that's things like shuttles, but it's also things like bike sharing, electric scooters. These are all great options to make sure that wherever you're dropped off through the bus system or the train system, you're able to get to your final destination very easy and conveniently. There's also a big problem that we have in our connectedness to the East Bay. We actually have an old train line, the Nebarton Rail, that is no longer in use, that private companies have been looking at resurrecting so that there are train corridors from East Bay to nearby areas as well. So I think that we should support that. And then we should make sure that we provide bus services to get to the last mile. So if that Dumbarton Rail ends in Menlo Park, let's make sure that it's easy for a lot of the workers who are coming from East Bay to Palo Alto are able to finally have a transportation option that they lack today. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Tanaka.
I love this question. I've actually been looking at this since I was on the planning commission, so it's been some time. The fundamental problem is VTA. We pay quite a bit into VTA, but we don't get a whole lot. And it does make me wonder, should we have merged our bus line into VTA? So as many know, San Jose dominates this. We don't really get representation. We don't get our fair share of service. So that's a really big problem. And I've been pushing for that on council. I think we should defund VTA, take as much money out of it and fund our own transit system. VTA is incredibly expensive. For each ride, it's like $30 to $40 per, there's no fare box recovery, not even close. It's pretty bad. As I mentioned, I 99% of the time I'm either biking or skateboarding. And that's because I use public transit. I take VTA, I take Caltrain, even to the airport. And to really solve this problem, we're gonna have to work regionally. And so I have a large number of endorsements from local elected officials. So I think that's how we could solve it. The last part of it is to partner with like local companies, scooter shares, bike shares. That's how we get the last mile problem solved.
Thank you. Ms. Malone.
Thank you. We need to improve public transit, bring back more shuttles, look into light rails, and improve our biking infrastructure to make it easier to get around Palo Alto without a car. We also need to look into bringing back our shuttle system with more shuttles, more routes and stops so that it lets people move more efficiently throughout the city. And I mean, not only our city, we also need to work with a lot of with the cities in the Bay Area as a whole in order to come up with a plan that allows for easier, more sustainable commuting while making it financially feasible on people who have to use it. Because the people who need this the most aren't the people like us who can afford to live in cities like Palo Alto, no matter how comfortably. It's the people who have to commute from Tracy, from Sacramento, and even Santa Cruz because they can't afford to live here. So we need to take them into account when making these regional plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Burt.
So I strongly support a significant investment and expansion in transit with Caltrain as the backbone to our system, an expansion of what's called micro mobility, which is bikes to electric bikes to three-wheel bikes and electric scooters, all of that matrix, which is rapidly expanding not only for the first mile, but electric bikes can easily travel the whole distance of our city and beyond. For most riders, I think that the city needs to restore the shuttle funding, which they completely eliminated in this budget in order to have a record-setting capital spending on big projects, and they decimated the budget. And I think that we need to look at 21st century technologies, not old 20th. And bus rapid transit, unfortunately, is an inefficient technology that would take away a third of the capacity on El Camino for automobiles. Instead, we need personal rapid transit that's a really efficient new set of technologies.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I absolutely support rapid bus lines along El Camino and in Palo Alto. It's easy for folks to say, we don't get our fair share of VTA resources. But as a member of the VTA Citizens Advisory Committee, and I'll be the first one to admit, there's a lot of dysfunction in VTA. But we as a city have not kind of held up our end of the bargain to build the density of housing needed to support public transit in an economical and viable way. And this is a result of our local control not being exercised with any degree of responsibility. So if we want to get our fair share of VTA funding and support public transit, we need to get serious about building housing, building density along these transit corridors to actually make public transit viable. And as the question suggested, housing is linked so much to environmental issues and climate change. Unless we're willing to get rid of market rate jobs, we need to build market rate housing as well to enable those folks to actually live close to where they work. It perplexes me that we would only focus on affordable housing. We need both.
Thank you very much. Well, it's hard to believe, but we're at our last question. How would you define the ideal relationship between the city council and the city manager and staff, and how would you work toward it? And for this question, Mr. Tanaka, you're first.
Yeah, actually, I like this question. So I think the balance of power, even though the 10 of us are like slugging it out of here and working really, really hard day and night to get elected, the reality is our city manager really runs the city, right? And maybe a little bit too much so, from the curfew to doing things like police reform, even for a chair to set their own agenda during meetings, you can't really do that. You have to get like 4 council members, which you can only talk to 2 others because of Brown Act issues. So there's a even though we're all working really hard to try to get elected, the reality is we actually have very limited power once we actually do get elected because of the fact that of the way the roles are set up. And so I think that the pendulum needs to swing back the other way to actually having more of the power into elected officials, because if we don't do a good job, we just don't get reelected, right? But I think with staff, it's this bureaucracy that is extremely hard to change with the unions and all the rules. So this is something that's actually a big issue and needs to be improved.
Thank you. Ms. Malone.
I think that it's really important that, one, we all work together, and also we keep in mind our roles when we are making decisions and creating agendas. There have been some instances of what people would consider an abuse of power. We need to make sure that things like this can't happen. We need to set a firm checks and balances system to allow for less room for error. We also need to work better together while keeping in mind the Brown Act and making sure that we're not putting ourselves at risk of getting in trouble. But we need to work together, especially because a lot of the big issues, especially that the new council will be seeing, are very important issues and will determine the entire growth of the city. So I would just like to encourage everyone to just work together and keep in mind that at the end of the day, our job is for the betterment of the community and make sure that we're improving the quality of life of our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Yeah, the number one reason why I'm running for city council is because there's just been a failure of leadership on the behalf of our current city council. They have abdicated too much responsibility and power to our city manager. When our council doesn't even set its own agenda or any of its committee agendas, how would we expect our elected officials to actually make progress on any of the issues we care about? And the fact that they have abdicated that responsibility explains why they haven't made any progress on these things. We need council members who are going to be bold enough and progressive enough to stand up and insist that we set our own agenda and not defer to staff. I think staff is, they work hard and they mean well, but it's clearly not working for our community, and we need our elected officials to step up and work on behalf of residents and not on behalf of staff. If we don't make this big cultural change in leadership, we're not going to make progress on any of the issues we spent hours and hours talking about. So this is key.
Thank you. Mr. Varma.
So I think that the idea that one person can just fix all our problems is unrealistic. So it's really important for the city council and city manager to work together. And it's been clear that both sides have abdicated the responsibility that the people of Palo Alto have given to them. So on the city manager side, there's clearly bad decisions that have been made. There are decisions that sort of a lot of the criticism around setting the agenda and taking unilateral decisions that the people of Palo Alto don't support. On the city council side, there's been also a lot of criticism that city council members are not prepared. They're not reading the pre-briefs. They're not doing the work that it takes in order to be a city council member. So I think it's really critical that the city council does uphold their side of this deal, and they take an active interest, and they are responsible, and they do the research. And then the city manager should look to the city council for guidance on important decisions and look to amplify the effectiveness of city council. So it's really important for collaboration.
Thank you. Mr. Lowen.
Yeah, another question that we could talk more than 60 seconds about. You know, I mean, the city council is in charge. The city manager is not in charge. So I think it's kind of a cop out on Mr. Tanaka's part to say that, well, we can't do anything. It's like it's in the charter. I mean, even if that were true, you'd sit down and say, look, I need these 3-4 agenda items on the agenda in the next 2 months. The city manager is not going to say no, because he wants to do what the city council wants to get done for the citizens. So I agree in some sense that even though the city manager is the subordinate and talking to 7 bosses, they need to work as a partnership and get stuff done. And they can sort that out easily enough by setting top priorities, having him execute on it, and they have to also make sure that he executes on it, which, as I said in the previous forum, often doesn't happen. And that's just basic management on the part of council to make sure that something that went to planning, for example, gets to planning. So I think it can work out, but there are problems on both sides right now that have to be fixed. That's the top thing that has to get done.
Thank you. Ms. Eisenberg.
There have been lately a lot of times where current and former city council members have been complaining about the out of control staff or the out of control city manager or the out of control city attorney. But that's silly. That's like the president complaining that the vice president is doing a bad job. The city council chose these people, hired these people, trained these people, and has the moral and legal obligation to manage the people who are in leadership at city staff. We all know that responsibility rolls up to the top. I wonder if anyone on the city council actually has had any real people management experience, because I have. And I have to tell you that people management means setting goals, tracking how well they're doing, and giving feedback. Right now, if city council doesn't like the job of Ed Shikata, replace him. I think Ed's great, and our city council needs to learn to manage. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Templeton.
Thank you very much. This is an important question and one that has at times led to tension in our community. So I think, first of all, when loopholes are identified, like the curfew situation, that happened because there was a loophole in, if we're in a state of emergency, the city manager could call a curfew. But these were unrelated emergencies, and that loophole hasn't been closed. So we need to first take responsibility as city council to fix the problems when they come up. And the other thing I would like to say is, you know, it's similar to what Rebecca mentioned. If we're dissatisfied with the performance of staff, or if we think that they're not bringing the expert level, we have to ask ourselves, you know, what are we doing about that? Are we doing professional development? Are we being clear about our expectations and our goals? Are we doing what it takes to attract the applicants to fill the open positions? So we have to think about what can we do as leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stone.
There are so many complex issues that the city council has to address. This is not one of them. The city hierarchy chart is incredibly clear. It's the residents on top, then city council, then the 4 city appointed officers. And so it's city council that directs city staff and the city manager to fulfill the wishes of council that should be fulfilling the wishes of our residents. When the city manager is having too much power, that's because city council has abdicated their power to give the city manager that type of authority. So I strongly disagree with Councilmember Tanaka on his assessment of it. We do need to be more collaborative, cooperative, united, working to fulfill the voters' wishes and to work well with one another. You know, I was watching Joe Biden the other day on one of his town halls, and he was pointing out, once we start questioning each other's motives, there's no chance to be able to work with each other. We need to make sure that both city council and our campaigns are being civil and working well with each other, because at the end of the day, we all want to see Palo Alto do better.
Thank you. Ms. Koo.
Right. So when we want to put things on the agenda, as you know, some of my candidate colleagues has said, you know, then you do it. I actually have to kind of say that is not true. It's It's a council majority that decides on what goes onto the agenda. And right now, our council majority does not have the will to put a lot of things that we need to discuss, such as the ABAG RENA numbers, such as all the legislation, some of the things that are affecting us right now that needs to be addressed. No, they're not. Even in hiring the auditor as well as the city manager, there is a process that we were supposed to go through where it was inclusive of the members of the public. And we didn't do that. We went into a session determined by the council majority. So I would have to say that it is the will of council members in order to make that happen, and the majority usually has the upper hand.
Thank you. Mr. Burt?
Yes, under our city charter, the city council has the authority and the responsibility to set policy and have oversight of the city government. The city manager is the chief administrative officer. Over the last couple of years with our current city manager, these roles have been somewhat reversed, and the city manager has been driving policy decisions, restricting the options presented to the city council, and doing so in ways that have been detrimental to good policy making. Chief administrators and bureaucrats don't necessarily know their communities. They haven't lived here. They don't represent the citizenry. They work at the behest of the city council, and the city council needs to exercise the oversight and its proper role. We need council members who actually understand how government works and how to make it effective. We also have the role of the mayor, who sets the agenda along with the city manager and is supposed to represent the city council as a whole, not his or her individual positions. So both of those things need to be corrected.
Thank you. All right, well, thank all of you. Now we're going to go to closing statements. A reminder that you each have 1.5 minutes for your closing statement. And Mr. Stone, you are first.
Thank you. Well, first, I want to thank Sigrid for moderating today, and to the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto for organizing this forum. And of course, to all of you who gave up your Saturday afternoon to participate in our local democracy. Now, solving our city's most pervasive problems will require council members who have both the character and experience necessary to lead. My experience growing up in this community, coupled with my 8 years of public service dedicated to this city, has provided me with an understanding of the diverse set of interests in Palo Alto. As a human rights commissioner, I've stood up for the rights of our communities most at risk. As a teacher, I work towards improving the health and well-being of our city's youth. And as the chair of the city's largest residents association, I have voiced the concerns of residents and our neighbors to city government. And as an attorney, I have the legal acumen to understand the complex legal matters council frequently faces. My experience and commitment to this community is why I'm endorsed by the Sierra Club, the Palo Alto Weekly, the San Jose Mercury News, Senator Jerry Hill, and many more. I invite you to learn more about my candidacy. And if you're interested in supporting me, please go to my website at greerstone.com and endorse, donate, or request a lawn sign. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
This November, sorry, do we want to reset the clock?
Thank you for waiting.
This November, we have an opportunity to change not only the direction of our country for the better, but to change the direction of our community for the better. If you're frustrated with the lack of progress on housing, climate change, transportation, on any of the issues we talked about this evening, then I hope you vote for change. I hope you vote for new blood and vote for leaders who are going to stand up to our city manager and do the people's work instead of staff work. I hope you will vote for leaders with true progressive democratic values. I want us to be a bold, progressive, and responsive community, bold in the sense that we are innovative and forward-looking, and we harness the passion and energy of our companies and our amazing people. I want us to be progressive in the sense that we are a community that works for everyone, including our underserved and underrepresented communities. And I believe that Palo Altans want a more responsive city council, one that actually steps up to get things done, to move in a more timely and responsive manner to address all of the issues we care about as a community. I have over 17 years of local government experience. I have true progressive democratic values and have the support of over 9 different Democratic Party groups and the League of Conservation Voters and Carbon Free Palo Alto and many others. I will also bring a sense of urgency to addressing all of these issues to our city council. I hope to count on your support this coming November. Vote Democratic up and down the ballot, vote for Stephen Lee. a progressive Democrat for Palo Alto City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tanaka.
Thanks, Ingrid, the League of Women Voters, and also all the attendees. I know it's a Sunday, so, or actually Saturday, so I know it's definitely appreciate everyone being here. So Palo Alto faces several unprecedented and interlocking challenges, most notably a public health emergency that is driving an economic crisis. Meeting these challenges while preserving a quality of life and keeping Palo Alto vibrant and safe requires vigilance, sensible spending, and a recovery plan. I have the skills and experience to help the city with all three. This is why I have doubled the number of endorsements versus the next closest candidate. I have over 20 organizations, including League of Conservation Voters, SEIU, South Bay Labor, and many others. I have the endorsement of many of the local elected officials, Jerry Hill, Mark Berman, Liz Ness, a ton of others, the current mayor, 22 current and former mayors. And more importantly, I have endorsement of many small businesses. They have been impacted tremendously in our city, depriving the city of revenue, as well as the services that residents expect. And so I have more endorsements from small businesses than any other candidate, as well as ones from former Congress members, assembly members, county supervisors, and the other elected officials. I will make City Hall work for you. I hope I earned your vote, and I encourage you to go to my webpage to see more of the endorsements and my policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Malone.
Thank you, SIGRS and League of Women Voters. I want to create better infrastructure for our future, advocate for housing as a human right, and reimagine community safety. You should vote for me because I'll bring a fresh perspective, innovative ideas, and more importantly, I will listen to your concerns, bring your voices to the table, and work hard to make sure that we're not only still talking about problems, but also finding solutions. I believe that a city council member's job is to improve the lives and well-beings of our constituents. That means taking measures to help small businesses as well as residents get back on their feet, those who've been hurt by COVID. I want to bring the voices to the table who haven't felt heard in years. This includes the working class, renters like myself, who are the reason that the city is as great as it is today. If you want information on me or my campaign, please visit ravenmalone.com, where you can find information, volunteer, donate, and request one of my beautiful pink lawn signs. I do hope to earn one of your 4 votes this election. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Lowing.
Thank you. I love it here in Palo Alto. And after many years of service, I think I know what my fellow residents want, and I know that there's some areas that we need to fix. I've been working to uphold Palo Alto values and improve our town for over 2 decades, from helping get homeless people the services they need to working with youth. And my mission is this mission is a core driver of me as a human being, especially as it creates a more diverse Palo Alto, which is what I want and why I live here. So this is me as a Democratic council candidate for you. I've demonstrated my commitment to community service in Palo Alto, and for 15 years, and then 10 more years on commissions. I'm proven. I've got a long list of accomplishments that you can look up. I've got deep experience in both business and the city that I can put together to address the problems that we've got. I'm ready on the issues to step on council day one to be effective. I don't need sort of on-the-job training because I know all the issues. And I can help create a more effective council, and I can help improve and implement our values for all residents. All of these points are why I'm the only candidate endorsed by all 3 returning council members next year, and why I'm endorsed by all 3 local papers. That matters. So I respectfully ask you to join them and vote for me so I can use that vote to help you. So thank you very much for the forum.
Thank you. Ms. Templeton.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to meet with you tonight. I'm running for City Council to make the promise of Palo Alto available to everyone in our community. My platform is around community wellness, including COVID response, climate action, including green transportation and green housing, and modernizing our city government with a special focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I know is very important to the League. I have worked with staff on the Planning and Transportation Commission. I'm now chair. I've also participated in the XCAP, which is evaluating railroad crossings, and the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan. And I learned a lot about how the city government works and what we need to do and how to work with staff. I also worked as a program manager at Google for over 10 years on a lot of different projects. The final role that I think is relevant is the role of being a parent. It's taught me how to be really flexible and make the most of what you have. So I think that this is the kind of creativity and responsiveness that we're going to need on City Council. So I bring proven leadership and experience to City Hall, strong communication and budget management skills, and resourcefulness needed to advance our community's goals. So I would love to ask for your vote. And if you want to find out more about me or reach me directly, you can go to my website. It's carryforcouncil.com, C-A-R-I. And I'd be happy to chat with you more if you have additional questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Burt.
I think Palo Alto's a really exceptional community, and I think almost all of us really believe that. But we do have significant challenges, and we need to have a forward vision on how to address those and evolve and solve those and meet those great challenges that we have today. Foremost is our current issues around the COVID emergency and the resulting significant impacts on our ability of our city to provide financially for the services that we've always valued, and the importance that we have to push on the priorities to have serving people first in this period, and not to have record-setting capital infrastructure spending in the middle of the pandemic. We need to reallocate our resources where they're most needed, including additional resources for things like rather than cutting fire protection, to expand it into the foothills, expand our teen services and the like. And as we move out of this, we need to have a balanced, sustainable community, socially, economically balanced, and with a sustainable environmental future where we truly tackle climate change, the greatest challenge of our time. We've seen that in the pandemic that we can rally our resources to really take on major challenges. And when small cities have taken on climate change challenges, it has had global impacts on other cities following. We need to be leaders there, and I know how to make government work for us.
Thank you. Ms. Koo.
Yes. Back in 2013, future Mayor Eric Filsef posed the choice of whether Palo Alto would remain a medium-density family town, a great place to live with good schools to send your kids to, or become a place of high-density office and housing with associated entertainment that was a regional draw with unsolvable traffic and parking problems and overstretched infrastructure and schools. The conflict over that choice is still with us today, unresolved, although the state and regional governments are trying hard to take that choice away and impose high density on us, contrary to what many of us moved here for. Reactionary solutions and policy just creates other problems and are an endless downward spiral of chasing problems. A pace has to be set that allows solutions and mitigations to walk hand in hand with proposed growth. A myopic rush to solve one problem cascades into endless degradation on residents' quality of life. We have the pandemic that we have to address coming out of it, and to ensure that our citizens, Palo Altans, are listened to and that we carry their wishes forward. We owe it to our town's history to explore solutions within the historical rules before we snub our nose at our proud history of ordered growth that has made us one of the most desirable places on earth. Thank you for your past support, and I ask for your continued support and vote. And thank you to the League for this forum.
Thank you. Mr. Varma.
Thanks everyone so much for your time. This is an important election. So when you're thinking about who to vote on your ballot, you should think of building a team that has all the strengths Palo Alto needs in order to build a great city. And the strengths that I bring is I have a background in small businesses. My dad ran an automotive repair shop. I've been around small businesses a lot. I built software for small businesses. I've worked with high-tech companies, many of the companies that we hope to help us out of some of the crises that we're in Palo Alto right now. And this is the kind of background is you should have somebody on council that is supportive of our businesses and wants to help them and thinks their needs. I'm very open-minded. I'm a quick learner. in my endorsement from the Daily Post, they talked about my willingness to work with everyone else on City Council and come up with new ideas. A lot of the problems that we've had in Palo Alto have been there for a long time. And so we need fresh ideas. We need people with different backgrounds. We need diversity on City Council so that the City Council that is going to be in place for the next 4 years has all the talents and skills that Palo Alto needs in order to be successful. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. I love talking to all the residents of Palo Alto. And you can learn more on my website at ajitvarma.org. And thank you, and humbly a request for your vote to better support you and the needs of Palo Alto. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Eisenberg.
This November, you all have a very clear choice, voters. We can continue down this course of business as usual, installing incumbents or people who already had 16 years to make a positive difference, but failed. We continued on the course of letting commercial developers write our zoning codes, of letting the biggest campaign donors get the choicest spots on our commissions, and where the wealthiest few get the most air and face time in front of our city council. But I think that our city deserves better. I decided to run for city council because I was tired of seeing the city council prioritize the wealthiest few over the great many rest of us. I was tired of seeing it abdicate its responsibility to manage the city manager and the city attorney, instead always pointing blame. I teach my teenagers to take responsibility for their own actions. Did the city council have parents who taught them the same? In a city whose leadership has consistently lacked courage and integrity, I seek to bring those characteristics to the city council. I genuinely care about our community. I care about the majority of us who are tenants, including myself, rather than homeowners. I care about fairness and transparency. I know that the Brown Act is intended to give public an access to view us, not to close the mouths of those who speak for us. I seek your vote. Thank you.
Ms. Eisenberg. All right. Well, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto, I would like to thank the candidates for running for public office and for participating in our forum tonight. I'd also like to thank the audience for participating in our forum tonight and for participating in the democratic process. We have a graphic here with helpful information for you in the upcoming election. We encourage you to visit votersedge.org. There you'll find nonpartisan information about measures and candidates and links to other helpful resources. Online voter registration is available at the Secretary of State's website. The deadline to register is October 19th. You may, however, after that date, vote conditionally. If you register conditionally, you can vote at any vote center when they're open. The vote centers will be open October 31st through November 3rd. This year, voters all received vote by mail ballots. They went out October 5th. We encourage you to vote early and vote safely. It's easy, secure, and convenient to mail in your ballot or to drop your ballot off at any of the secure ballot drop boxes, which are listed in your ballot if you're looking for a location. If you have to vote, visit a vote center before Election Day, if you lose your ballot or need help or made a mistake, we want to assure you that appropriate precautions are being taken at all the vote centers to keep voters safe in this pandemic. We hope you'll encourage your family, your friends, and your neighbors to participate in this election. Be heard by November 3rd. Thank you very much. Good evening.